First, I'd really like to thank Festival of Faiths and Kathleen Lyons, who reached out to us initially, and Sarah Harris for all your incredibly gracious facilitation in getting us here. And Owsley, I can't see you. Yes, there you are, okay. For your extraordinary work chairing this and all the work altogether. And if Christy's here, what an extraordinary vision to carry for 19 years. And I'm so glad that you exist. So I'm very happy to be here, and we really thank you very much. So for the Festival of Faiths. And we're looking to grow a relationship, and I know some of you will be joining us at Bioneers in California in October, and I hope many of you will also come and join us. So I wrote a talk, and then I decided to not give it. What a waste of work. But I'm going to read a few parts of it that I felt were particularly germane for how and why we're here. But I'd like to do sort of a hybrid of just talk with you a little bit, and tell some stories, and then read some parts that I think are worth hearing, things that I've learned over the years. And you know, what I would say at the beginning too is that, I'm sorry, one last acknowledgement, which is that we have a Bioneers chapter here in Louisville. Yeah. Bluegrass Bioneers. So we're very grateful for keeping the faith, the Bioneers faith here in Louisville. So thank you, and I hope everybody here gets to participate in that as well. So Snail is trucking through Snailville, you know, minding his own business, and along comes Turtle and runs right over him. And finally, the Snail police arrive, right? Bit of a delay there. And they say, what happened? What happened? And Snail says, I don't know, it all happened so fast. So, you know, we didn't get here overnight. This wasn't a summer romance. This is really the end game of a civilization on a collision course with nature and each other. And basically, you know, to put it, I know everybody here wants to hear all the positive stuff. So that's what Bioneers is about. So that's easy. But I do want to acknowledge a couple things that were said here over the last few days. And, you know, in cultural terms, basically we've been acting like a rock star trashing a hotel room, and it's the morning after. Only this hotel is planet Earth, and the guest rules are non-negotiable. And if we don't change our ways really fast, we're going to get voted off the island. So, I mean, that's the short version. And also, we really did pass a very significant threshold last year of 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. The last time this was the case was 3 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens existed. Earth was a hothouse. Camels roamed the Arctic, and the sea levels were 50 to 80 feet higher. So this is the big gulp. This is beyond being a disaster. I mean, this is heading for complete catastrophe. And, you know, the solutions are largely present. That's what we're going to talk about with Bioneers, and we'll get into more of it in conversation after this. But, you know, whatever people said the last few days, it's even worse. I have to be honest with you. It's that serious. And the next 5 or 6 years, I believe, and many of the wisest people that I know believe, are really kind of the do or die moment here to cause a major global shift, to redirect. And if we can redirect the ship, we could at least avoid complete climate chaos and the many other interconnections that go with that. I'm actually more optimistic than I've been in a long time, because I think what we're witnessing is a kind of a global movement of movements that's been growing incrementally for quite some time now. It's a real convergence, and I think that whatever is going on, there are other forces at work, that there's simply a zeitgeist right now, a kind of, you know, an idea whose time has come. And in some sense, probably intuitively, that we all feel around survival, that things really, really do have to change. It's a time of momentous breakdown and breakthrough. So in many ways, I am actually extremely hopeful, and at the same time, I think we need to be extremely sober and recognize this is it. You know, it's showtime, and we all need to really show up. The other thing that wasn't mentioned that I think is really important to say is that there's another really big thing going on right now. And yes, you know, on one level, we're all complicit in different ways in this, and really, we're also really not. Globalization has pushed wealth upwards into a concentration that is unparalleled in all of human history. Inequality in the US today is, the concentration of wealth rather, is twice what it was in imperial Rome, which was a slave and farmer society, okay? According to the CIA, the US is more unequal than Egypt and Tunisia at this point, right? And as they say, the 400 wealthiest people in this country now have more than the, quote, bottom 185 million. I mean, a bottom, that's more than half the population. So, and that's, you know, the wealthiest country on earth right now. So this is very serious, and it's basically a very small handful of fossil fuel billionaires who have captured our political systems and our government policies. And it's not that the public kind of gets it actually, and 75% of the American public, according to polls, believe that big business has too much power in this country. So let's not kid ourselves, we're not in control. And that's one of the topics I want to get to a little bit, is what we do about the rhinoceros in the room, which is corporate power. And I also want to distinguish, because within the 0.01%, there are also many really wonderful people who are, in fact, who need to be with us, and we need to be with them. And I think that that is also beginning to occur, and anyway, don't get me started about that, but so. And the one other thing I want to say on that same topic is that I heard, a number of people say we're the 100%, and there's truth to that, and there's also exceptions. And I don't know if any of you might have read Robert Hare's book about psychopaths. But the core definition of a psychopath is a complete lack of empathy and an utter lack of remorse, right? It's somebody who has been stripped of what we would all probably consider to be your most basic humanity. They're also often extreme narcissists. And Robert Hare has a wonderful psychopathy checklist. And if you go down that, it actually looks like sort of a job description for a CEO. In many cases. And I think we also need to be realistic that there are people who are severely damaged goods. And there really ought to be a 12-step recovery program or something like that for these people. And but it really is criminal behavior. And I think we also need to be cognizant of that. So a lot of the premise for starting Bioneers in 1990 was really that the solutions are largely present, or we know what directions to head in. And that's even more true today. And I kind of fell into this during the 70s and 80s, like many people at that time. I became acutely aware of what was a looming environmental crisis. And what I want to know is, okay, I don't really want to sit here shivering in the dark in fear. What do we do about it? Has anybody out there figured anything out? And one by one, I just started to kind of poke around, and I was a journalist, and I'm just an interested person, whatever. And one by one, I began to find these really remarkable individuals who had come up with really serious systemic solutions to major environmental crises. And the first characteristic, I looked for patterns, or the patterns looked for me, one or the other, excuse me, was that they were all systems thinkers. It's all connected. It's one of the most basic precepts in life. And so you have to solve the whole problem. You can't silo these things. And we created initially what we called a Declaration of Interdependence, right? And it's very simple to understand. Taking care of nature means taking care of people, and taking care of people means taking care of nature. That's all that we really need to know on one level. The other characteristic was all of these people had looked to nature, not as a physical resource, but as a teacher, mentor, and model. We don't really want the cake, we want the recipe. That's what it boils down to. And that later became very much the inspiration for Bioneers, a field that didn't have a name in 1990. Janine Benyus gave it a name about 8 years later, called biomimicry, the idea of imitating nature. And the word bios, is the Greek word, means life. It's really the study of life, natural life. So I wanted to share a couple of things in that regard, a few things that I'd like to read that I think are worth thinking about from a cosmological perspective, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about biomimicry. So Chief Oren Lyon, some of you may know, we had hoped to actually help bring him here this year, but he was already committed somewhere else, but I hope you'll get him in the future. He's an Iroquois elder and faith keeper, and kind of a global citizen diplomat, also has a great sense of humor. So Oren asked a question at Bioneers a couple years ago. It's the pressing question, I think, for all of us. How do you teach 7 billion people to respect their relationship with the earth soon, now? So he posed that question. Why? Because we're facing a crisis, he said. And he went on to tell this story in the context of the 2012 end of the Mayan calendar. This was a couple years ago. So he said, we have good relations with the Maya. We've known them for a long time. So I asked one of their leaders, well, what's happening in 2012? And he said, calendar's coming to an end. I asked, then what? He said, well, we'll make another one. However, he added, there'll be a period of enlightenment. And Oren continued his story. He said, I'd been talking to some friends in Long Island, and I thought about that. Here's this businessman who works in New York, and it's a beautiful day. So he decides he's going to take his boat, go out and do some fishing instead of go to work. He's way out in Montauk, tip of Long Island, sitting out there fishing. Bright sun, hot day, so he jumps off the boat and swims around. Pretty big boat, and you need a ladder to get back up. The ladder's there, he's floating around in the water, beautiful. He drifts a little ways from the boat, but not far. He turns around and he sees a gray fin coming directly at him, about 3 feet out of the water. Oh crap, he says, should have went to work. That's a period of enlightenment. And one of our friends who comes to Bioneers who speaks is actually Iroquois Six Nations from Canada, Huỗ�ngton Forest, but she has been living and working in Chiapas with the Mayan people for about the last 30 plus years. And we had the chance to sit down with her, and she told me some of the Mayan cosmology about this time and this moment that we're in right now. And I'd like to share some of her words about that. The Mayan people call this moment the time of no time. From here on, we're on Earth time. Mother Earth is shaking to her core. It's a time of madness, disconnection, and hyper-individualism. It's also a time when new energies are coming into the world, when people are growing a new skin. The Mayan vision says we in the West will find safe harbor only if we can journey past a wall of mirrors. The mirrors will drive us mad unless we have a strong heart. Some mirrors delude us with an infinity of reflections of our vanity and shadows. Others paralyze us with terror and rage, feeding an empire that manufactures our fear into resignation. But the empire has no roots and it's toppling all around us. In this time, everyone is called to take a stand. Everyone is called to be a leader. To get beyond the wall of mirrors, the final challenge is to pass through a tiny door. To do this, we must make ourselves very, very small, to be very humble. Then we must burrow down into the earth where indigenous consciousness lives. On the other side is a clear pond. There, for the first time, we'll be able to see our true reflection. In this time of no time, we can go in any direction we want by dreaming it. Our dreaming can shift the course of the world. And paradoxically, this moment that we're facing now, this crisis, is exactly the dream of our current civilization. The dream of endless growth, materialism, hyper-individualism, and domination has turned into a nightmare. So how do we dream our way out of that nightmare? Well, one way is to wake up. And that's exactly what's happening all over the world, and people are awakening, I think, to a new dream. So what I'd like to do is to share with you just a little bit about biomimicry in that context and another perspective on that. So when I was beginning to learn about these people out there with these fundamental solutions, they really were looking to nature as a teacher, mentor, and model. And essentially in 3.8 billion years, nature has done everything that we want to do, but without mining the past or mortgaging the future, right? And the solutions are elegant, they're simple. Nature doesn't gulp energy, it sips it. There's a lot of research that's been done on this now, but nature solves 95% of problems through structural innovation, structural approaches, and organizational ones. Very seldom does nature use a lot of energy. Our technologies, only about 12% of our technologies actually use organization and structure as principles. So here, try this on. The journal Science reported in 2005 that the giant earthquake, the one that caused the Asian tsunami and ruptured more than 800 miles of seafloor in the Indian Ocean, also set off a series of temblors felt nearly 7,000 miles away in Alaska. 1 hour after the quake, Mount Wrangell recorded 14 small earthquakes in 11 minutes. Said Michael West of the Alaska Volcano Observatory, it was pulsing, if you will, in sync with the waves from Sumatra. In fact, the earthquake's massive shock waves ricocheted around the world, raising the Earth's rocky crust by ½ an inch. For weeks, the planet vibrated like a bell. Commented West, we're learning that the Earth is a far more connected place than we once thought it was. Naturalist and author and biomimicry expert Hunõngne Benyus investigated what happened in Thailand before the tsunami. Elephants started trumpeting. Lizards, insects, and snakes started climbing up into trees. The flamingos that were breeding near there had already gone inland. They were shocked to find no animal corpses besides humans. The animals had moved inland, they'd moved up. Pacinian corpuscles are mechanoreceptors in the tip of an elephant's trunk and its feet that are also found in human skin. They sense what are called Raleigh waves that move in and through the earth. They were started by the rupture in the earth. These Raleigh waves move in the surface of the earth about 10 times faster than the speed of sound. Elephants pick up infrasound. The animals talk to one another with infrasound, very low tones through the air. Their infrasound, we now think, causes Raleigh waves in the earth so that their messages can go even farther. So that an elephant can say, I'm ovulating, come home. An hour before the elephants started to wail, and before the first waves hit, elephants who were toting tourists around broke their chains and ran inland. We, of course, ran toward the sea. We're a young species with a lot to learn. We see through a glass darkly, and when you do that, you should probably borrow some lenses from the organisms that can see much better. So we're really tuned in these days to survivors. So what if it's all connected? That question arose in the 1960s for scientific researcher James Lovelock. After NASA asked him to design experiments for the Viking space mission to determine if there was ever life on Mars, he began to ponder what makes life different from non-life. Outer space brought him back down to Earth. Lovelock was intrigued that Earth's atmosphere had remained relatively constant over long periods of time. Just a small increase or decrease in the amount of oxygen would either set the atmosphere on fire or kill most life forms. Why has the ratio of oxygen remained at just the right level? Why have the oceans maintained just the right salt concentration favorable to life? How has the temperature range that life depends on managed to remain relatively constant? Lovelock's bold hypothesis was that somehow the sum total of living things on Earth has modulated the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide, the saltiness of the sea, the surface temperature of the planet, just as our bodies know how to regulate themselves. With microbiologist Lynn Margulis, Lovelock proposed the Gaia Hypothesis, the idea that the entire symphony of life, of all living things, self-regulates the Earth's conditions to make the physical environment more hospitable for them in an exquisite dynamic balance. Think of it as a vast hospitality enterprise. Or, in the words of Hunõngne Benyus, what life does is to create conditions conducive to life. So if there's a single mission statement, that's probably it. So really what we're entering now is the age of nature. The saying is, we didn't invent nature, nature invented us. They say that nature bats last, but even more importantly, it's her playing field. So we would be wise to learn the ground rules and how to play by them. And we're surrounded by genius, surrounded by elders. So just to give you one example, so there was a bullet train, how this is practically being applied right now in Japan. A bullet train went through very, very crowded neighborhoods, and it would go through tunnels, right, where because of the difference in air pressure going into a tunnel, it would cause these horrendous sonic booms, right? And you can imagine entire neighborhoods feeling like they're being bombed constantly several times a day. So one of their board members from the bullet train was a birder. And he wondered who in nature, would be dealing with this kind of differential in pressure. So he looked to the kingfisher bird, which dives straight down into the water at very, very high speed to go fishing, right? Yet it barely makes a ripple when it goes into the water. So they redesigned the front of the bullet train like the beak of a kingfisher. No more sonic booms. I mean, that's just to give one example. Velcro is the first sort of well-known biomimicry invention. It's like from a bird that will grip onto something, right? One of our favorite biomimics is Harmon. He's an Australian inventor who grew up by the ocean in Australia and became fascinated with actually what turned out to be nature's favorite form, which is the spiral, right? And the spiral is pervasive, from how the blood flows through your vein to how water goes down a drain, to the shape of hurricanes, to the shape of galaxies, to how air moves through your lungs. Yet it's never been applied in design. It's been a fascination, a long lineage of everybody from Leonardo da Vinci to Descartes to on and on. It's the golden mean. It's the Fibonacci sequence that's a representation of aesthetic beauty and infinity. It's the sort of perfection of aesthetic, design. So Jay began to apply these spirals first to boats and then to propellers. And we don't think about it, but motors in the world use about 60% of the world's electricity, yet they're horrendously wasteful. And so he looked at propellers and motors by applying a spiral design, and saves massive quantities of energy. If you see a propeller in the water, it creates a tangle of disturbed energy. When you look at his impeller, which is a spiral so beautiful that it's actually in the Museum of Modern Art in New York as artwork. It's a gorgeous little spiral impeller. It creates virtually no disturbance whatsoever and saves about 70% of the energy that you would otherwise be using. Huge energy saver. So Jay applied this to water treatment a few years ago. You've probably seen in cities the very large 2 million gallon water storage tanks, right? Well, they have a tremendous problem with those. In fact, they have to have 2 of them because what happens is there's heat stratification that occurs in the water, which breeds bacteria. So then they have to pump in tremendous amounts of chemicals as well as move it from one to the other to try to get some motion into it and stop the bacteria from growing. So Jay put one tiny little impeller that uses the power of about 3 light bulbs in the bottom of this thing. It creates a spiral vortex, just that vibration in the water. And they now have to use they don't have to transfer the water between tanks, and they use virtually no chemicals at all because of that simple design. Now, just to give you a sense of the bleeding edges of this, Jay says that climate change right now, essentially the greenhouse effect, is almost identical to the stratification of heat that you find in these giant water tanks. So he's now working with a very large city in China, about 200,000 people, where they're using this for air pollution to create a spiral vortex in the air that he says, if you did this on a slightly larger scale, could actually buy us 20 years away from climate disruption by essentially blending the atmosphere. I mean, anything of that nature, and we will see geoengineering schemes coming up soon. I mean, things are now out front enough about what's going on that we're going to see really crazy stuff start to come out. The same mentality that created the problem is going to now create further problems. So anything like this is always very, you want to have a lot of precaution in what you do. But if you're going to try anything in that realm, this would be what you would want to do. In a slightly different realm, we hear about biotechnology. Most of these are not biotechnologies. They're still highly mechanical technologies. But a true biotechnology is our very good friend, Paul Stamets, who's a mycologist who will be at Bioneers again this year. I think we first met Paul around 1996 or 97. And you will never know how absolutely fascinating mushrooms and fungi are until you meet Paul Stamets. But Paul knew, of course, that there were tremendous health benefits to various mushrooms. In fact, one of the mushrooms that he collected from the Pacific Northwest rainforest where he lives, the turkey tail, is now moving through NIH as a cancer cure for breast cancer. He gave it to his mother who had stage 4 breast cancer, I think in her 70s, and she has had a complete recovery doing nothing but that. So Paul asked the basic question, well, if these are such powerful medicines in our bodies, what role do they play, as a healing agent for Earth, for the land? And long story short, there was a huge spill of diesel fuel near his little farm up in Washington State. They brought in all the bioremediation companies to have at it. They gave them each a cell of dirt about 20 feet square, contaminated with diesel fuel. I mean, overwhelming stench from all of this, and said, have at it. So all the kind of more standard, heat, beat, and treat companies came in with different types of technologies. And what Paul did is he inoculated the pile with the spore from oyster mushrooms that you would buy and eat, with gourmet mushrooms from the store. They all came back about 6 weeks later, and one by one they're ripping the tarps off these things, and the stench of hydrocarbons is overwhelming. If they were working at all, it was very, very slow. And then they get to Paul's, right? And they rip the tarp off, and it is blanketed with oyster mushrooms, some of them 2 feet in diameter. They tested the flesh of the mushrooms, they tested the soil, essentially no trace whatsoever of diesel left. This is a basic Bioneer principle. In nature, there is no waste. Everything is somebody's lunch of either food or energy. You just have to know which organisms to mix and match, right? But that's only the beginning. The story gets even better. So what then happened was the mushrooms started to decay. Worms and maggots came in to eat the mushrooms. Birds came in to eat the worms. The birds brought seeds on their feathers, and within a matter of weeks, this dead, contaminated dirt turned into an oasis of fertility, right? Now, oil is the basis for the entire economy, basically, but chemicals, agriculture, I mean, the implications of this for rapidly remediating degraded farmlands, from synthetic chemicals is overwhelming. And you don't actually need an engineer, you need a gardener, right? I mean, this is something that we talk about citizen science. This could be done globally, and it's unlike a Superfund site, it doesn't take hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. It takes very little money and mostly some people power and some knowledge. So this is the kind of thing that needs to scale. When we say that the solutions are present, this is serious stuff. And the real issue is, how do we move this stuff to scale very, very quickly? And that's a lot of what our focus is with Bioneers right now. How am I doing on time, Nina? Are you tracking a little bit? Yeah. I'm going to run out of time. I had so much more. So let me just give you a couple of other things then. One thing, McKinsey & Company, whom probably some of you have heard of, a global management and business consulting firm, very mainstream, very respected in those worlds, has written a report about a year and a half ago that 2015 is the year when distributed solar energy is going to tip. And what's been developing over time for a variety of reasons is, we have this, obviously electric utilities are some of the worst CO2 polluters, and without changing that, we're not going to get very far. However, their business model is completely archaic. They're these highly centralized fossil fuel dependent systems, and investor owned, the wealth flows upwards. So because of, in part, China and how cheap solar panels are now, solar energy is truly competitive financially and can be distributed at the rooftop level and at the community level very, very widely. There's a great new company called Mosaic that you can check out that has come up with an innovation which is financial, not technological. The technology is all there. What they're doing is doing project by project that you can crowdfund it, where regular people from $25 and up can say, we could say right here in Louisville, you want to do a large community center or take an entire neighborhood and go solar with community generation, get off the grid. You can invest in that project. You don't get equity. You get a guaranteed 4.5% return over a 2-year period. And you are personally helping to move distributed energy widely. So this whole thing is predicted to tip next year. Very likely it will. It's truly revolutionary in that regard. The utility industry is quaking in its boots. They are now trying to impose taxes on you if you have solar panels on your house, that you're going to be charged for using their power lines, right? Whereas now you actually get money back if you can put money into the grid. So that's just one other example. Another one is that, well, let's see. Yeah, so let's talk about corporations a little bit and other game changers. So a fellow named Tom Lindsay has a group called the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. And Tom is one of, I think, only 200 public interest attorneys in the whole country anymore. I mean, this used to be a large field, and it has really, dwindled. And he was representing, local governments and citizens who were experiencing environmental harms of different types, usually poorer communities because they're the most vulnerable, always. And he couldn't keep up with the demand. There was such an overwhelming need for his services. So what he did is he started to train citizen lawyers, and they began to win the cases. But then what happened was it would move up the political food chain, and it would get to a policy board or a governor, and they would just shut it down and just basically change the rules of engagement and say, sorry, we're approving this pipeline or this factory farm or whatever, and you can't object. And what Tom discovered is we have a constitution that's fundamentally a property rights constitution, which creates many, many contradictions. So, and as you probably have followed with Citizens United and other court cases, corporations have somehow gained this thing called personhood, that they are a human being, which is obviously completely absurd. I mean, they don't die, for starters. They're sort of clearly, if they're immortal, there couldn't be a human being. But in any case, what they discovered was that really what they needed to do in order for this to work was to revoke corporate personhood at the local level. And so this was a community in Western Pennsylvania initially, where they were moving in huge factory farming en masse, like mega companies moving in. It's an area with a lot of traditional farms and a many hundred-year tradition of family and small farms. So people did not want this. It was clear it was going to destroy the landscape, destroy the economy, because farmers were already under pressure, and this was going to essentially make them serfs, working on these impossible contracts that gave them all the liability, basically. And so what they ended up doing was simply revoking corporate personhood, corporate constitutional rights at the local level, and banning factory farming. And this went up all the way through the political, food chain in Pennsylvania, and they finally actually won. There's now 400 communities in the US that have done this. But what evolved in the course of this was that, and this came from the people, not from Tom, was that people said, well, it's not just a matter of us wanting to have the right of self-determination in our community. What about nature? And what became clear is nature has no rights because we have a property rights constitution, right? So bears, rivers, ecosystems, they have no rights at all. They're just considered property. Anybody can do whatever they want. So what's wrong with this picture? When we talk about creation, what does that really mean? So what they did is they mimicked work coming out of originally from South Africa to give nature rights. 142 communities have now done this. And as a person, you can stand as a trustee on behalf of nature and say, you can't do that to the river because the river has a right to exist, persist, and flourish. And through a daisy chain of connections that originated with Bioneers, it landed, and through Lynn Twist and Pachamama Alliance, it landed all the way in Ecuador, where it is now in the National Constitution of Ecuador. Enforcing it is a whole other matter, but it exists. These are the game changers. So, I just give you a glimmer of that. So I didn't get to half of what I wanted to, but I'd like to just close with one thing from our good friend, Andy Lipkus, who runs a group called Tree People. Is anybody familiar with Tree People in Los Angeles? Okay. So they're if we have time, we can talk more about some of these. But in this time of no time, the Mayan time of no time, what we need to get past the wall of mirrors is a strong heart. And this is how Andy Lipkus puts it. I believe that every single one of us has a scanner on board that's operating in our body that nature must have installed. It's our heart. It's asking the question, where am I needed? How can I help? When something hits your frequency, my frequency, it converts to adrenaline, a biochemical response. It might be a drip, it might be a shot. When we're given a shot of adrenaline, like when we see a car accident, it gives us the power to go help lift a car off the injured person. It looks like a miracle, but it's nature's gift to us. When the ecosystem is hurting, we get the drip. We're hardwired for this. The love that's there can sustain us. It's what really feeds us. I've come to believe that nature has adopted us to be its healers. It's raised us from being infants that were helpless to being brilliant, powerful, compassionate beings. We've got to take care of the mom, Earth, because she's given us everything to raise us to this point, not so we can kill ourselves. Where am I needed? How can I help? Your heart will answer. You're big enough. We can do this. No one before has ever faced what we face today. We make the road by walking. So it's an honor to walk this road with you and keep the faith. Thank you.